Chasm is something that's defined as a rift or a division, and for me, I wanted to present work that explores that division.
Welcome to the McMaster Museum of Art. I'm Julian. Welcome to Chasm, an exhibition curated by myself and Pamela Edmonds.
My name is Pamela Edmonds, and I am the co-curator of Chasm with Julian. And this exhibition is a critical curatorial exploration of the museum's collection of over 6,000 objects. And we together selected a series of work that explores issues around decolonization, around Indigenous sovereignty, around Black radical imagination, if we could call it that.
In speaking today about Chasm as an exhibition, I'm also speaking on my curatorial practice and the nature of my curatorial research for the exhibition. The one thing that's not talked about a lot in Canadian public galleries is the nature of exhibition making. Therefore, in taking a critical look at the McMaster Museum of Art collection and presenting a collection exhibition that wants to challenge and confront the narratives of colonialism is a big undertaking. So this is the beginning of a critical conversation, this exhibition, in the sense of taking into account the reality that we're living in right now in 2023, and also as we move forward in relation to how museums and what museums do with their collections in the future.
We are very much interested in having the show be an experiment and a proposition and a question. So the work is not necessarily about a certain theme. It's really about looking at the relationships between objects and to put into conversation a lot of the ideas that a lot of museums and galleries are dealing with in the contemporary moment around what is a museum in the 21st century? What is our relationship to the objects that are in our collection? How do they come into our collection? Are they still meaningful? This exhibition sort of starts to unpack, I feel, some of those conversations around collections and what they can mean, and about our spaces as institutional spaces, about how we engage with them.
I'd like to begin by recognizing all the keepers of the sky, land, and water. I stand in peace with my family, relations, ancestors, and as an off-reserve citizen of Indian Brook First Nation in Nova Scotia on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation and of the Black diaspora.
So Chasm is really an exhibition that is looking more so on the architecture of museums and galleries. So I was very much interested in the ideology of the white cube gallery, and Sherman Gallery is a white cube. And I was reading a lot of theory about the ideology of the white cube, particularly through Brian O'Doherty, who talks about it as a modernist obsession, like this idea that this space is neutral, which it isn't. You know, it's a space that is separated out. The idea of the white cube is that as curators and as institutions create this sort of neutral space where the outside world doesn't come in, so we can, you know, contemplate these works away from the rest of the world. And for me, I felt like this kind of space is a space often that is hierarchical, that is a space where, you know, if I'm being honest about it, then a lot of non-white people don't feel comfortable in. And so I wanted to deconstruct some of that. And so a lot of the works in this space deal with whiteness, you know, as a color, but also as an ideology. But then there's other works that also deal with blackness, and blackness that is not just something that's perceived as a negative, but blackness is something that is, you know, all the colors in one. It's like infinite possibility, but it's also something that symbolically is a void. Alfredo Yar is somebody that I've always been interested in as an artist. And it's a piece that he did in 1995. And it's comprised of 99 color prints placed inside of 99 archival boxes with text that are built up to form into this solid black square. And so for me, I see it as a monument or a memorial work that is, you know, to memorialize lost black lives. He traveled to Rwanda in Africa in 1994. And after seeing images in the media of the horrific civil war that was going on in the country, and he was shocked that there were few peacekeeping nations that were involved to stop the killings. And so Yar took photographs of the devastation, but he didn't want to contribute to the spectacle of violence that deeply upset him, which he referred to as the world's barbaric indifference. And so he made numerous works about Rwanda over the years, and he took thousands of photographs. But this particular work has a single image, which is concealed in this black archival box, and it's silk screened onto the top of it that says what the contents are, which are images of death and genocide. So for me, I wanted to move away from this kind of gratuitous voyeurism around Black Death and find a way to speak to the violence of colonialism without actually showing violence, but to indicate that it's real. Another sort of monument-based piece is James Leahy work, Not for Finding, from his Altarpiece series. Here we see a single image of a white skull, which hinged between images of trees. And so I see the trees as the symbolism of life, like a tree of life, but you can close the doors not to see that skull. And so the skull is, I think for many within our culture, is a symbol of death, but in other cultures it's a symbol of life. Like it's a reminder of the fragility of life and our sort of common humanity. Similarly, Betty Goodwin's haunting drawing, The Color of White, which is a large canvas, which is characteristic of her images that show like an abstracted body, which is floating and genderless. And but Goodwin also plays with opposites, so I was interested in how she looks at transparency and opacity, heaviness and light. And attached to the canvas are these series of ropes, which for me brings up, you know, if I'm talking about the history of Black life in North America, it brings up images for me of lynchings. And so this is a whiteness that doesn't necessarily represent purity or innocence, but it's pain and submission. And then further, speaking about the color of white, is this piece, this large photographic print by Nicholas Bayer called October, which for me is a study of whiteness. It was created in 2000. And so Bayer uses the camera as a tool for collecting like everyday materials. So this is actually an image of a friend of his apartment in Montreal. We see this empty bed. And for me, I see the bed as a space also of an absent body, which is also, you know, a recurring theme in the show. But the bed, you know, the body sort of feels like recently present. And, you know, the bed is another symbolism for dreams and intimacy. So I see it also as another kind of monument in a way to this sort of absence and presence. These other works here by Michael Thompson, drawing light on a wall, and then Serge Tousignon's prints. They're also explorations of form and light and shadow. For me, it sort of replicates the white cube again. The other two artists in the show that are dealing with that sort of inversion of black and white is Yves Gaucher and Guido Molinari, who were artists that were considered kind of important avant-garde artists in Canadian art, known as the Plasticiens, which was a group that was working in the 1960s in Montreal. So a lot of the works that are in this show have this sort of absence, but absence as agency, so this absence as taking back one's subjectivity. And so in contrast to that, there's the work by Takeo Tanabe, which is a graphite drawing called Alberta Foothills, which is just an expansive black space. Like, when you look at it, you're like, okay, this is just a black canvas. But it's something where sort of all life has disappeared into, like it could be anything. And so for me, I think it deals with this idea of a void, but also possibility. And then in contrast here are the works by Lita Letendre, which are one of the few pieces in the show, I think only ones that actually do have color. And so for me, it's sort of presents the contrast to the work that's in the rest of the gallery. And it's a celebration of life and movement and dynamism. Letendre was one of the few women and few Indigenous women that are working with the abstractionists alongside the automatistes in Quebec. And her work is really meant to be the celebration of life. So it starts to shift some of the conversation around, this opposition around, violence and death, but also, starting to speak about color as inspirational and life affirming. And sort of an end point of the exhibition is a piece called Revolving Concave Mirror, which is by Joseph Kaleja. So he was a Maltese-born artist who worked in Hamilton for a short time before moving to Toronto. And so it's a kinetic work, which is a motor-powered black box has a mirror inside of it. And so I use mirrors a few places in the exhibition to sort of reflect back the audience, so to bring people back into an awareness of their own body in the space, and implicating them as maybe a voyeur, but also a participant.
So for today, I'm going to start with Shelley Nero's work from 2001, which is made on tar paper with correction fluid, where she has drawn a particular form and also text that speak to the names of First Nations across this land, and also to the languages, Indigenous languages. So she's speaking to, in some ways, addressing and maybe correcting the absence by bringing the names, the language present through this form. What's exciting about this work, and this work has been in the collection for some time, is that the different materials speak to a particular era and also aspect of her practice, her artistic practice, that is sort of overlooked, more known for her photographic work and her film work as an artist. But also it speaks to the nature of the land here and the territory that we are sitting on, but also it speaks to the many lands and to the presence and the Indigenous histories that are written or unwritten. As we look to Arthur Renwick's work, Delegates, Chiefs of the Earth and the Sky from 2004, this work is unique in the sense of bringing the photograph in direct contact and produced with metals, which is aluminum and copper. With the grammatical cutouts on the top of the image, the artist, Arthur's speaking to what is used in language to define meaning in relation to agreements between Indigenous communities and First Nations across this land in relation to the ownership of that land. It's amazing that the work speaks so directly to what is now considered the extractive industries and the use of land, and also in many cases the misuse of land and who profits from that. Still resonates at many levels and also speaks to the horizon of our ideas and thoughts in relation to the land. Behind me is Ansem Kiefer, and his work speaks to the nature of humanity, of what is lost, and also the use of materiality to develop a visual vocabulary on the canvas that speaks and is of multiple materials. In this case, malted lead, charred acrylic, different forms and layering to engage the viewer into the nature of what he wants to speak to. In this case, informed by mythology and also natural forms that speak to the nature of humanity and history, of what is lost and also what is gained in many ways. These layerings of materials and the buildup of that speaks to presence. So there's a very much a paradoxical nature in the work that holds so much meaning, but also engages you in a particular way to see beyond maybe the assumptions of the text or the written word, and uses the materials as a way to speak that language.
So on the upper level, Tomlinson Gallery, that space is meant to really be in sharp contrast to the Sherman Gallery. So I see this space as very minimalist and austere and neutral. And then upstairs is more maximalist and colorful. And so the works in that space are a lot more rounded and curved, less angular. They deal with repetition and cycles and nature. And a lot of the pieces in that show have a familiarity with the domestic furniture, consumable items with a twist, so to speak. And so with that work, I was very much interested in this notion of the uncanny, which refers to this sense of strangeness that comes when something familiar takes on an unsettling quality. And it's when something that is repressed is brought to the surface. And so for me, I was seeing it, the idea of the uncanny was about unsettling the colonial narrative and how the uncanny could be a way to enter into conversation about releasing something that's repressed. And so one of the first pieces one sees when they go into Tomlinson is a work called The Final Sleep by Spring Hurlbut, which I was seeing as a work that deals with birth and rebirth and death and afterlife. As opposed to the Sherman Gallery, these are works where the body becomes present again. And so with that work, you see an antique metal baby's crib that is covered in beeswax with a sort of protective balm. But above it, you see a photo portrait of a young infant that has passed away. So it's a death portrait. And these death portraits were very common in the Victoria era, especially among the upper classes. in photography's early days. And so, you know, for us, for our sensibilities, I think for many of us, this is unsettling and morbid. But it was also seen as a practice to blunt the grief and honor the dead in one's family. And so these photographs about loss were called mirrors with memories. And so this section repeats the memorialization or monument, but the body is not invisible or hidden. It's sort of dealing with the reality and honoring life in a different way. Before you even come into the space, you notice the glow of the pink into the room. And so that bright magenta pink on the wall was influenced by the cover of the book Chromophobia by British artist David Batchelor, which focuses on society's fear and mistrust of color in modern and postmodern eras in the West. A lot of modernist work and a lot of architecture is uncomfortable with this idea or this presentation of bright color. And so I was interested in how he associates color with irrationality and excess and disorder. And so on that wall, sort of centered in the wall, is a work by Chris Cran from his modernistic Sublime series. And Cran is known for his witty and subversive paintings that have a sort of neo-pop sensibility. And so you see this sort of very bright yellow painting, but on the left side you see a gray tone image of sort of like 50s era salesman with a suit whose gaze holds the viewer and has this sort of smirk where he's just like closed the sale maybe. But then what's being presented in the painting is sort of this kind of blank page or clip art. And so Cran did a whole series with the same salesman and all these different objects. And I think for me it speaks to the consumerism of art and objects. And so I wanted to have a work that kind of was anchored by this idea of art as a consumable object. Jan Wade's memory jug, which is made of found materials like buttons and marbles, is another work that has a similar conversation around memory and objecthood. Jan is an artist who was actually raised in Hamilton, and these memory jugs were something that were brought from the continent into North America, inspired by African funeral rites. And so these vessels would hold the belongings or objects from the departed. And, you know, you see the peace sign listed. Peace could be, you know, peace out, like goodbye, or it could be, you know, the V for victory sign. It's a very smart work, which is about celebration of Black life.
The Levy Gallery is made up of all newly acquired artworks except for the Goyas that are in the McMaster Museum of Art collection. It speaks to the presence by Indigenous, Black, and artists who identify as racialized that are only recently being acquired by public galleries and museums across Canada. This is a contested space as curators that we find ourselves in. So therefore, what does that mean? How do you curate from your own cultural positionality when there is a lack of representation of those works from your cultural position? So reaching to the complexity of art and speaking to areas of art as a curator that I have constantly been interested in, which is curating in contemporary Indigenous art, in multiple mediums, but also the Black diaspora and artists who are racialized in Canada, to broaden and make more dynamic exhibitions and exhibition making that speaks to a broader critical and cultural reality that most of us live in Canada. So I'd like to continue in the Levy Gallery and make some links from the space I am sitting in here in the Panabaker Gallery especially with the artistic practice of Shelley Nero. A recently acquired work, Nature's Wild Children, is black and white photographs that Shelley originally photographed in 1997. However, she has taken from her artist archive and made a new work that was produced in 2022 to speak respectfully to how life is given and how land has remained such a strong cultural signifier within her work, but also within the reality of her practice, and for a lot of us living and contending with the nature and our relationship to the land in the 21st century. Other works, and one of the exciting narratives that came out of the selection of works from the collection by Pamela and myself, is to include artists from this area, from the Hamilton area. Marissa Alexander's ceramic work, The Dancers, 2 from 2022, is unique to the collection, is unique as a new work because of it's a ceramic work. This is a hand-built white stoneware with various glazes, epoxy, and enamel paints that represents Black women's bodies moving in a joyous kind of layered use of color, references to nature, and also the scale of it speaks to the nature of the presence of the Black female body in the museum, which is usually absent, actually. I'll end by speaking to Ed Penn's works. Fortunate for us, we have 2 works of Ed's in the McMaster Museum of Art collection. A smaller scale work, Interstellar from 2018. It's ink on black paper that looks very celestial, but very layered. His large-scale work, Wasteland, which was produced in 2008 to 2012, is ink on 3M reflective laminate mounted on paper and ink on paper. This particular paper is unique in the sense of how it is layered and also how it is in contact with the light, but also it speaks to the nature of how the artist has taken on working with different types of paper materials to create a layered and shadowed sensibility within the work. I've placed Ed's work, Wasteland, between the Goyas, which are basically, from an art historical perspective, speaking to a history where there's been much destruction in human history. However, for someone who is moved more to peace and to speaking about peace, I wanted these works as a reminder, but also as a signifier of the complexity of what is lost and how it's lost, and what is wasted and what is saved. One of the major influences remains for me from mostly lots of reading in the 1990s, so I'll date myself there, is an essay by Bell Hooks called Choosing the Margin as a Space of Radical Openness. How does a curator, how does an artist remain open in their process of creation? In my work as a curator in relation to exhibition making, that enables the viewer or the visitor to the exhibition to have an experience. If you're not working from a place of openness, then where is the space to enter, to be a part of the conversation, to understand what is being presented to you? This essay was an intellectual catalyst for the initial curatorial conversations with Pamela that guided my thoughts on artwork selection and informed me that I needed to get past the museum conditions and curate the Panabaker Gallery here and the Levy Gallery from my space and location. It's very tiring to be in a state of constant oppositional political thought while working in a museum. I am here to do the work of a curator from my cultural position, which is easier said than done, but also it opened up opportunities in working with the collection because of the opportunity to work with so many amazing artworks and to think of ways to present them that would be dynamic and engaging for audiences.
Chasm is a type of division. It's a rift. It's a margin. It's a way to kind of look at the peripheries in order to explore what those peripheries can mean. And this exhibition is about exploring those peripheries and putting them in conversations with the center, because the same narratives have been repeated for many decades. As someone who's been in the field for close to 30 years, this moment, the last few years, is one of the few times we've been able to have more honest conversations about what's happening within our exhibition spaces. And so I'm really happy to be able to present this exhibition, because I feel that it's these kind of conversations within our gallery spaces don't quite happen very often, and I feel that they should be happening more.